We will get started in just a minute, everyone. I'm just going to give people a minute or two to join. All right, we will go ahead and get started as our last couple of people trickle in. So thanks everybody for taking the time to join us today. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So all connections for an optimal connection, we recommend using computer audio in place of telephone connections. All of your microphones have automatically been set to mute. We will be sharing some live experiences and live polls throughout the webinar, so please make sure you participate, push your answers, put any thoughts, comments in the chat. It just helps make this webinar a bit more interactive. And then if you do have any questions for our panelists, you can submit them through the Q&A section or the chat section at the bottom of the screen. So I will go ahead and introduce our wonderful panelists who are here today. So we have Megan, who is a product manager here at Sama. She has over 8 years experience in digital product development, working on innovative technologies, including Sama's 2D image and video labeling solutions. Ryan is a senior solutions engineer here at Sama, and he helps machine learning teams improve their models through quality labeling and advanced data curation solutions. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and push the first poll so you can share your experiences. Okay, so please make sure you answer so we can chat a little bit around what do you consider the largest cost for developing machine learning models. And Ryan, Megan, maybe you can share a couple of thoughts initially while we wait for everybody to respond.
Sure, maybe Ryan, if you want to take a first stab at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, generally speaking, data prep is something that comes to mind often when it comes to AI or even analytics projects that be looking out for these types of answers, but you never know.
Yeah, and I would also look at different types of ideas about what type of data you're annotating and what the application would be. Sometimes you find different options as well for that can also dramatically affect the cost.
Okay, great. So maybe we'll go ahead and move on. It looks like we're still trying to convince people to fill out the polls, so we'll keep it live for another minute or two. I really encourage you guys to fill out these polls because it's great to share experiences among your peers on some of the challenges that you're facing, and it just helps give us some live feedback to help advance the discussion here in the webinar. All right, so as Megan and Ryan I think alluded to, data quality in particular is crucial for developing your machine learning models and having accurate predictions. But selecting a scalable annotation solution that's going to meet your accuracy, budget, timeline requirements can be a bit difficult. So Megan, you're pretty familiar with the data annotation platforms. Can you walk us through some of the different types and why someone would want to choose one over the other?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I'll start with the customized in-house platform. I've seen this used within quite a few different companies that have very specific annotation needs, and having a customized platform allows them to get to their goals from that context. What I often see sometimes, although within these types of solutions, is there's a bit of a gap when we look to take that operationally, to think about how we manage workforce in terms of performance metrics and reporting. Next, in terms of a self-service platform or a SaaS platform, these types of platforms have amazing learning materials that you can understand all of the details of their platforms. And they're often coming out with the latest and greatest new features to be able to keep up with the ever-evolving market. One aspect of these is that it's probably less tailored to their individual clients, as they're looking at more of a platform and a holistic solution. The last one of these options is the partner platform, and it's like probably the least transparent actually of all three. And that's because normally a partner is really using the tool themselves internally. And as such, they actually have motivations to tailor it more to their clients, but also to their workforce. So we tend to see lots of efficiency come out in terms of the partner aspects.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight about efficiency. And, as we think about the annotations, the platform's really only one side of things or one part of the equation. Ryan, can you dive into the second piece and some of the pros and cons around using in-house annotators versus perhaps crowdsourcing or using a third-party annotation partner?
Yeah, absolutely. And generally speaking, when we think about the workforce options, we can think of them on a spectrum between how much control you have over the annotators and the process itself. And that degree of control can impact various things like cost, quality produced, scalability, and risks in your annotation projects. So on one end, you have full control, which is your in-house annotators, right? And that's you hiring your own annotators. And that has a lot of benefits, of course. It's easier to communicate with them, easier to coordinate projects, which generally leads to better quality control as well. However, there is a major downside there too, as I'm sure a lot of people have noticed, which is it's very costly, right? Hiring people directly, as well as it's not very flexible and scalable. So you're quite limited generally during the peaks and valleys of your annotation periods in terms of what you can ramp up and ramp down from in terms of annotation headcount. This option also generally requires setting up an efficient process around annotation and quality review, which also often can be underestimated. So that's the full control side. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the least control option, which is crowdsourcing your annotators. And crowdsourcing can be great, especially if you're looking to scale annotators that are coming from a variety of cultural backgrounds, languages, or locations. Generally speaking, that's much easier with crowdsourcing, and crowdsourcing also tends to be a bit cheaper than the other options. Now, on the downsides of things with crowdsourcing is quality control, right? Quality and consistency can be uncertain because crowdsourcing companies don't have as much control over their own workforce as the other options. Coordinating with them can also be a bit more challenging, as they are basically contractors working for the crowdsourcing company. And security can also be a hot topic there as well. Again, relating back to the less amount of control the companies have over their annotators. In the middle, we see the annotation partner, which is the third option here. Annotation partners own their own workforce, and Sama is one of them as well. And what that usually results in is better quality than crowdsourcing for sure, as well as better consistency. And that relates to the annotation partner having close control over the training and tenure of their annotators, as well as annotation partners that are very scalable, right? So because they serve many different clients, they're able to ramp up and ramp down based on your project needs. So that's another benefit of annotation partners. And lastly, it's also security. So again, security with annotation partners tends to be better, again, because of that control that we've spoken about. Now, there's of course also downsides of annotation partners, in that they are more expensive than crowd, while also being less than in-house. They are a bit more expensive than the crowd option. So you will be paying a bit more of a premium for the benefits you gain around high quality, better security, and flexibility that you receive.
Yeah, there's really a difference in, I would say, at the core of all this, you have to really value how you value execution through these different types of options as well. At the core, you can really optimize depending on what your highest value is. Is it speed? Is it efficiency? Is it control? Or is it quality? So those are some different things to consider in tandem with the workforce.
Yeah, thanks, Megan, for those additional insights. So, Meta released its new segment anything model, and I'd really be curious to get your take on this model, how you think it's performing, whether you think these types of models or auto labeling will take over the data annotation role. Ryan, what's your take on Meta's new model?
Yeah, Meta's new model called Segment Anything is quite interesting. And just to summarize for people in the room, it is a model that is pre-trained on massive amounts of data, and I believe also unlabeled data. And it's able to automatically segment objects in an image. Now, these types of models we refer to as pre-trained models. Nowadays, we also call them foundation models or auto-labeling, just based on the massive amount of data sets they're trained on. And the value of these pre-trained models, of course, is that if they fit your use case, they can give you a head start on your model development. So for example, we often see for use cases that require person detection using bounding boxes, pre-trained models can play a role there for sure in terms of getting you, and halfway there. And then you can take that model and then fine tune it further to make it work specifically for your use case. But as you noticed, you still need to do the fine tuning there, right? So you can't just take a pre-trained model and use it out of the box, in which case you already have your model built for you and you just purchase the model and you're good to go for your use case. But that happens to be quite rare. In fact, we see a lot of fine tuning happening with these models for which you need a human in the loop annotation still. And for more complex use cases that we see a lot in SAMA, oftentimes we evaluate and see, does a pre-trained model actually speed up your annotation process to begin with, right? Sometimes it is faster to annotate from scratch than fix a prediction that a pre-trained model made. So when the goal is to produce high quality at the most efficient cost, this is also something you want to keep in mind is, does the pre-trained model actually deliver that value that you're looking for? And lastly, a pre-trained model should also still be validated, right? You need to make sure it's actually accurate, it performs in production, and that's also when in-house annotators in general play still a major role.
All right, great. Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to push another poll for everyone around your confidence in foundational models and how far you think they go. So, encourage everybody to participate and answer the question. It takes 2 seconds, and then we can share the results so you can see what your peers are, what your peers feel. So while we wait, it looks like we're getting a couple of you responding. So I will give it 30 more seconds to get some answers here. So it looks like the majority of people feel that foundational models get to 50 to 65%. So I'll go ahead and share the results here. Megan, what's your takeaway? Do you agree with this? Disagree? What are your thoughts?
I think it really depends on the data that you're looking to annotate and the model that you're using for pre-labeling. So in terms of quality requirements, I think 50% for most cases is pretty fair, but I could see it even lower depending on the cases and the types of shapes that you might need to be using.
Ryan, do you have anything to add to that?
Absolutely agree. It totally depends on the use case. So we can take these averages not completely at face value, but generally speaking, I agree as well that it gets you some of the way there. But yeah, I would have been surprised to see anybody here at 90+%, for example.
Great. So kind of moving on, when we think about the platforms in the workforce, Megan, you were mentioning a little bit earlier that you've seen some challenges arise when you're trying to select or pair the platform with the workforce option. Can you go a little bit more detail into that?
Absolutely. So when we're considering platform and workforce, we presented them here independently, but I really believe that you have to consider them in unison and as a pair together. I'll start with one example of if you're using an in-house platform along with in-house annotators, that might be a really good solution for a small scale or maybe just starting your model development. But when you start to reach that problem where you're looking to engage an annotation partner or crowdsource, that in-house platform might not be suitable anymore. So making that first choice early on can seem like it's a minor factor, but it can be a major impact when you're looking to get to that next stage of your business.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And definitely something that you need to consider. I'm going through a couple of the questions right now, and let's go back to the auto labeling. So we have a question for Hermont. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name properly. If not, I apologize. But Ryan, his question is, does auto labeling take the place of annotators? And what do you think long term? Do you think that more people are going to be relying on these auto labeling solutions, or do you think that you're always going to have annotators in the process?
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? And when you think about auto labeling, again, I think about the pre-trained model here, right? It's effectively the same thing. And yeah, I think overall pre-trained models, as time moves on, will play more of a role, right? And eventually these pre-trained models will just become models that we use and automate things, right? Like, it's easy to forget that the whole point, or a big reason for AI and ML, is automation, right? And at some point the model is ready to just automate. But to get to that point, you need that human in the loop annotation component, and we're still quite far away from getting there out of the box, right? As you saw with the results in the poll, between like 40 to 60%, that's how far they can get us nowadays on average, right? But as time moves on, we do expect it to increase a little bit, but there's still that role for the humans to play for use cases that haven't yet been solved. So hopefully that gives a bit more insight.
Great. Hopefully that answers your question. Feel free to throw any additional questions in the chat, and we'll try and infuse them in live as we go through the different topics. So we'll move on to the next section. This is a great overview of the different components of your data annotation solution. So now we'll shift to some of the hidden costs, right? You have your more of your obvious costs, your top line costs when it comes to the annotation fees, right? So this is what you're paying your annotation partners. This is what you're paying your crowdsourcers. If you keep things in-house, you have your annotator and manager salaries, which also does include things like PTO, health benefits, 401k, things like that, right? And then you'll have your platform costs and support. But there are a few other areas that might not be as obvious and can, have an impact on the overall, your overall budget of your project. And things like speed and accuracy can have just as big of an impact as some of these top line fees. So Megan or Ryan, I think, can we talk a little bit about the cost of quality and the quality review process, and what some of those hidden costs or things that you've seen pop up with annotation projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So to have an efficient quality review process to produce high precision labeling at scale, there's usually a couple of things that fall under the radar. One of them being annotator training. So how do you train your annotators effectively? Depending on the vertical or the use case, that can be quite different. So for example, in the agricultural technology space, that training is actually quite non-trivial, right? You need to invest a lot of time in training people to understand the differences between the different types of diseases and plants that require labeling. And that requires a level of investment that, can be easy to be forgotten about. The second thing is around annotation rework. So it's really easy to think about the happy path, which is, I get my annotators to annotate, and I use that in my model training. But what about the instances where the annotation is actually not up to quality, right? How do you reject them? How do you rework them? How do you incorporate that cost, that extra cycle there into your annotation budget? So that's something also to be aware of and think about proactively. And then lastly here, the instruction guidelines. So oftentimes, especially in retail, for example, we see clients with very large taxonomies. And the question also becomes, how do you manage building these instructions for the annotators? How do you ensure that these instructions are being kept up to date? Do you have the right communication channels in place to surface, these edge cases that put into question your instructions, right? All these things take more time, and it's easy to just forget about them and just balloon your budget later on.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And it, as you start talking about timelines and delays, that really segues into another big area of cost that can pop up around project management and the cost of those deadlines and delays. Megan, do you want to speak a little bit more about the time and money cost of delays?
Yes, absolutely. So project management can be the difference between hitting your targets and being on time, or going over time and over budget. So that can have many different factors. The first one can be just simply related to project delays. So that can be, from a project management perspective, we're looking at that. It would be a hidden cost in that your time to market would be affected by things like, and even an extra week can set you back and can be the difference between hitting that deadline or not. Now, project delays can be the factor of many different aspects, but it can also be related to operational inefficiencies. And we see that pop up in a number of ways. So one of those can be longer feedback loops. So scenarios where getting feedback from the client team, clarifying a specific instruction or guideline can be the matter of a couple of days or a week, and that be some of the differences. And it can result in something called idle time. And idle time is when you have an annotation team ready to go, trained up, but they're missing maybe something like that instruction or that seed data. So those can all be different factors. The last one relates to actually the platform in general, which can contribute to those delays as well. So here we've noted them as maintenance costs, but I can put it in perspective of how, if there is an issue with the platform, how does it get resolved? How long does it take to get resolved? Do you have those clarifications? Or on the other side, the platform can be influenced by if you need to add more annotators to be able to complete your project on time, you might have the impact of needing or requiring additional license or seats on that platform, which can also have unexpected costs that you might not have budgeted for initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Megan. I think that just gives a little bit more clarity on, the cost of delays. The longer it takes an accurate model to get running and to make, high performance and accurate positive predictions, the longer it takes for businesses to start generating value. So really understanding the project management concept can help keep things moving along. So moving on to the next area around security, this is one thing that I think is starting to pop up more and more over the past couple of years, especially as data breaches are on the rise. They really have risen exponentially over the past couple of years with the, more and more people working from home, and it can pose a pretty significant risk and financial impact to companies. So Ryan, what are some of the things that you think companies should think about with respect to data security and their data annotations?
Yeah, so when it comes to data security, you definitely want to make sure that if you're outsourcing or insourcing for that matter, that you have the certifications in place. Security certifications, they should be, table stakes. But the actual workforce option that you choose matters as well. So if you have sensitive data, and most companies tend to, for example, crowdsourcing can be inherently more risky, as crowdsourcing companies can lose control over data access because the data is usually in the hands of their contractors, which are their annotators. And we actually had a recent example where the data breach happened with one of our clients. They had sensitive data leaked on the internet, and that was data of their customers in their private homes. So you can imagine the amount of cost to their reputation that caused. The client was using a mix of crowdsourcing companies as well as annotation partners, and we were their annotation partner in that case. But when a data breach happened, the first thing that they said was that we knew that it wasn't Sama that leaked the data because of our track record of security and the way we are set up as a annotation partner. So just for everybody's information, we are fully vertically integrated, which means we own our own secure offices where our annotators work, and we have full control over where, when, and how annotators interact with customer data. So that just generally minimizes the risk or reduces the risk of data breaches to begin with, compared to other options like crowdsourcing. Our client actually ended up just dropping the crowdsourcing companies and is just sticking now with annotation partners because of that exact reason, because of the inherent risk that you have with options like crowdsourcing when it comes to data security.
Yeah, I think it's scary to think about having your data leaked online, especially private sensitive data or your clients or customers' data. That's huge impact both to your brand as well as your bottom line. All right, so Megan, one of the other things that you were bringing up earlier is you thought scalability is an area that often gets overlooked as a cost. Things are going well when you have lower complexity or lower volume projects, but then as you start to expand, things start to fall apart. So do you want to talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Absolutely. Data scalability is something that comes into what I would classify as a good problem to have. It's the problem that every company developing their ML models is looking forward to having, that scalability problem. But there are some aspects when we were looking to scale up our data pipelines where the data annotation components can come in sneaky ways that we might not have initially expected. So some things you might want to look out for to make the right decisions early on include looking into the platform capabilities. Couldn't your platform handle that additional data storage that might be required to really increase the volumes that you would be looking to do, as well as can it support additional users when needing to add those additional seats as well. The other aspect is, are you set up to multiply your team 2x, 5x, 10x? Having those training and hiring structures in place early on are really critical to being able to not only scale up your volume, but to also scale up your workforce aspects. So as I mentioned earlier, execution is really key, and it can really suffer if you're not looking into those scaling parameters early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Just to chime in here, and this is actually where we see a lot of companies that use the in-house annotator option fail. Because they do well on smaller annotation project, but once it comes to scaling that, it's actually a bigger jump than they would have expected. And that's when when it comes to annotating millions of images, that's where these projects run into these issues that Megan just pointed out.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially when you're talking about millions of annotations on a monthly or quarterly basis. All right, so I'm going to launch our last poll, and then we'll move into some final thoughts and some Q&A. So I've seen a few questions come in, but as a reminder, drop your questions in the Q&A. Here's the last poll. Which of the costs do you think have the most impact on your project? So I'd be really curious to get your take on this. And of course, we will share the results if we get enough people to participate in their takeaways. So while we're waiting for people to respond, maybe we'll do the one question from Reza. What's your take on free open source annotation tools such as Label Studio versus paid services?
Maybe I can put that one on. In terms of an open platform, what you're going to see is a lot of variability where they might not have necessarily optimized in terms of the usability of their platform or in terms of integrations. So that's where you might see some open source tooling be less successful than, say, a paid solution where they have really looked more holistically across the various needs. That said, open source tooling can be great if you need to optimize it to your specific use case. So there are some benefits of going within that type of an approach.
Yeah, and I'll flag here quickly as well as I've seen clients use, for example, CVAT, which is also an open source annotation tool. And again, going back to scalability point, it worked really well in the beginning when it was more manageable projects. But when it came to scaling it to hundreds of thousands of annotations, things like integrations, support, and even reporting were things that the client didn't necessarily notice were lacking until they got to that level where reporting actually matter to understand performance of annotators, right? So if you're going with something like that, just make sure you think ahead and think about, what would this look like at scale as well? Does it have the support? Does it have a number that I need to call, for example, right, in case things don't work out? So some things to consider there as well.
So it looks like project delays and quality review are the two biggest costs that our participants are sharing. A little bit surprising, nobody responded about data security as being a big cost that might have an impact on your project. Megan, Ryan, any thoughts here on this poll, and then we'll move into our final thoughts.
Yeah, it's funny with data security, it's never a cost until it is, right? And when it is, it's usually pretty big, right? So it's a miss you would want to just be able, you can manage and minimize, but yeah, it's not something that you're paying for on an ongoing basis, right? You just want to make sure that you never need to pay for it, I guess, is one way to say it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go into just kind of final wrap-up thoughts, and then we'll answer a couple of the other questions at the end. So Megan, Ryan, if we can try and wrap this up in the next 30 seconds, a minute, what's kind of your main takeaways here?
Lisa, do you want us to go over the slide in particular, or kind of give final thoughts here?
You can kind of wrap your final thoughts into this slide, so we have some time for questions.
Okay, thank you. So I was going to say, in terms of this slide, so this slide really summarizes a lot of what we've discussed today. So it looks at all of the different aspects of what might have additional costs within your data annotation process. And then it looks at all of those different workforce options as well. So you'll see that in-house, you're going to see a lot of the costs early on in terms of people, annotators, training, platform. Meanwhile, you go to crowdsourcing, you might see a lower fee overall initially, but there's more risks, especially when you get into that quality rework, as well as the security and the data perspective, where you might have not have that level of control that you would have had if you had kept your annotations in-house. And then finally, a partner situation, you might see a larger annotation fee initially, but it's likely because that includes additional services that might not be covered in other ways. Examples include a platform. It can also include training, as well as a guarantee on quality, which would include rework. So there's lots of other benefits here. And mentioning it earlier, these different options also have different aspects in terms of timing and scale, and it's important to look at those constraints as well. In-house, you're going to be constrained on your volume about the number of people you are able to hire. Crowdsourcing, the number of annotators is no longer a challenge, so you're getting that quick turnaround, but it might be at the risk of quality. And then finally, with a partner, you're going to hit a more regular scheduled process, so it's much more predictable, and that could be a benefit for a lot of different situations as well.
Yeah, and Ryan, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about how Sama, the cost structure and the structure of Sama, and then we'll move on to some of the questions.
Yeah, and I'll keep it short, but Sama falls under the partner category, but we take the partner word or term very seriously. We are a fully managed service partner, which means that the costs you're seeing includes all of the other costs that we talked about, including the hidden costs, and that's because we take care of the training of our annotators, the platform itself, guaranteed quality levels, including rework, ISO certified offices with very strict data access management. And our clients really like this because it's very transparent, right? There's no surprises on some of these areas that we just talked about, as well as the scalability component, right? We are able to scale with our clients, and we have done that with many of them enterprise, where we deliver millions of annotations a month. So yeah, if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us. Would love to dive deeper into this with you.
Maybe I can add one more aspect about Sama as well, is that when you're working with Sama, the annotators working on your projects only work on your projects. So it's an aspect that is unique in terms of our dedicated project teams. They become experts in the clients that they're working with and the annotation instructions, and they can even bring up interesting items along the way as well.
So one of the questions that we got in from Gary is, can you comment on how all of the topics discussed so far apply to medical annotation projects? So I guess, do you have any tips around medical annotations or things to be aware of?
Quickly, my thoughts. Medical annotation definitely requires much more training, right? So when we're talking about the costs of annotation, training your workforce would be something I would keep on top of mind. Likely you need some people that are quite experienced that can maybe train your workforce. So like crowdsourcing would definitely not be something that I would think of right away, right? It would either be in-house or partner. But yeah, it reminds me a bit more of agricultural tech, where training really makes a difference.
The other aspect I've seen in terms of medical annotations is also attention to detail. There's the training component, as Ryan mentioned, but as a part of that, it's knowing the differences between the different items and identifying them. So identification can be a key important item as well, where images are not so easy to identify. They might not be as clear, so you have to really be able to be that detail-oriented view.
And how do you see the ML model real-time monitoring human supervision as a service developing in the near future?
Yeah, I think it'll be more and more important as more and more models go into production, is to ensure that the models are correct, right? And that really matters, for example, when the external data changes. So how do you protect your model against data drift, right? Having a human in the loop, right is what we call it, to ensure the quality of your model in production, and feeding it back with feedback is quite crucial there. So I just see that increase as more and more models get deployed in production.
As well as an aspect of when you have models in production initially, as well in terms of training data, selecting the right training data is also something we see to be very important, so that in terms of we're not biasing over one particular use case over another, to be able to really have that very holistic and very strong data source right from the get-go.
And so kind of shifting gears a little bit to another question. So how do you ensure that all annotators have the same understanding of the requirements and can apply the same logic to various images that require subjective evaluation? So I think this kind of goes back to one of those hidden costs around quality. What tips do you guys have?
What I've actually seen, and this is one where I can say anecdotally, something that I've seen within our teams of when something is subjective, not only are we looking at aspects of training, we actually look at our team to identify those subjective use cases and discuss them together to bring a recommendation. And to be able to say, hey, I'm not sure about this one. What would we think? What would be our recommendation? And then bringing that forward to the client for verification. So I've seen there's an aspect definitely of training being very clear within our annotation instructions and iterating on them within our calibration phases, but also working together is an aspect that I've seen work very productively.
Yeah, and I'll add that for cases where the task is really subjective, there's also other workflows that can be considered, such as consensus workflows. And that is when you have multiple annotators annotating the same thing, and then have compare them and see if there's at least two annotators that agree to a certain answer or to a certain annotation, that would break a tie and determine which annotation is correct. So obviously it's more costly because you're having multiple people do the same task, but in cases where that really matters, and we've seen some of them, that type of setup can also help with that subjectivity.
So we have time for one more question. There's, I think, going to be a few that we're not able to get to. So we will follow up with you after the fact, or feel free to reach out to us and connect. This one I find kind of funny. So data annotation is expensive. So are there any solutions or alternatives out there that help make it less expensive? Megan, Ryan, any thoughts on how to combat some of the expense of data annotation?
Yeah, I can
Go
speak
for
to it
it.
briefly. Data curation, you want to be smart about the way you curate your data as well, right? You don't want to just be randomly sampling images and using them all for annotation, right? You would ideally want to start off, for example, with a representative sample in terms of the features that are in your collected data, so that you're using the least amount of data, but get the most amount of model performance for your annotation buck, so to say, right? So the data curation strategy, I think, can be a big driver of that as well. You know, if you already have a model in production, right, looking into, for example, the predictions where your model is failing, right, and using that to find similar images in your collected data for annotation can be another strategy where you're honing in on what you're annotating and thus reducing the overall cost on just annotating blindly, right?
Yeah, Megan, I
Absolutely.
also remember you telling me a story, I think, about prioritizing the data that you're annotating. So, you know, for example, in the autonomous vehicles, you know, objects that are kind of moving toward versus objects that are maybe too high up or moving away. What's your take on that and how that impacts the cost of data annotation?
Lisa, you explained it so well just there in that both I was gonna say there's a intention of more is more, but when it comes to data annotation, what I found to be the most successful is when you're actually looking at the less category and you're being the most intentional with what you are annotating and how you're going to use that outcome. So yes, in the scenario you just said, you could have annotated every single car that you would have seen within, say, a video context, but those costs can add up really quickly. Depending on how long that video is, how fast cars are moving. So all of those can come together into into your annotation fee or an increased cost. Being more intentional of, I need to follow the car, only the one that's in front of me, and only in these types of contexts. And if it moves away, then I would like to annotate a different car. So being very judicious with what is being annotated, as well as how that's going to apply later on within your model. It's only going to be in that focus is going to help later on in terms of the development, make sure that you hit all of the cases that you need to.
Great. All right. Well, thank you both for joining us today and sharing some of your thoughts and experiences around the hidden cost of data annotation. So with that, we will end this this webinar, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.